Hello, and welcome back to Sleeping Noir. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into dark, chilling tales whispered through the shadows of Sleeping Noir, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1. Do you remember how old you were when the sun went out? The kids in our little settlement ask me that all the time. I always answer the same way, because I can't lie about it even if I wanted to. I was 12, old enough to understand that adults were scared, but still young enough to think someone, somewhere, must have a plan. Back then, the scientists were shouting warnings into the air like it was a wall that could listen. Our leaders, the ones who were supposed to protect us, were still arguing and fighting like money and pride mattered more than tomorrow. The news kept going on and on. Experts spoke in long words. People online called it fake. Others called it the end. It dragged on for months, and then one day, right in the middle of the day, everything went dark so fast it felt like a giant hand had flipped a switch. I was inside when it happened. That saved my life. People who were outside, walking, driving, playing in yards, sitting on porches, working jobs that suddenly didn't matter, didn't have time to run home. The temperature dropped so hard and so fast that the body couldn't adjust. It wasn't like a normal winter cold. It was like the world turned into an open freezer in a heartbeat. Some died where they stood. Others made it a few steps before their muscles stopped working. It didn't take long for whole streets to go quiet. Billions died in those first hours and days. We still say that number out loud sometimes, like saying it keeps us honest about what we lost. After the dark came, the sky looked wrong. There were no stars, at least not the way we used to see them. The only thing up there was a red ring, like a wound in the sky surrounding the place where the sun used to be. A black hole. The idea should have been impossible. Not in our sky, not like that, not so sudden. Scientists used to tell us the sun would die slowly one day, swelling bigger and then fading into something small. Other people said it might explode and wipe us out in one bright moment. Nobody expected what we got. The sun simply gone, replaced by a hole that drinks light. Afterward, people tried to name the event, like naming it would make it easier to hold. Some called it the darkening. Some called it the Great Blackout. Most of us just called it the day the sun died. Governments didn't last long after the truth became impossible to hide. For a while, officials tried to tell everyone to stay calm, to trust them, to wait for instructions. But when the darkness didn't lift, and the cold didn't stop, when food supplies failed and power grids died, and the internet became a ghost, people stopped listening. The anger was bigger than fear for a little while, and when that happens, mobs look for someone to punish. It didn't matter who you were. Podcasters who had called it fake. Celebrities who had told everyone to stay positive. Politicians who had promised solutions. Presidents who had smiled on camera while doing nothing useful. When people finally accepted there would be no rescue, they turned on anyone who had fed them comfort or lies. They didn't even waste bullets. Bullets were too valuable. They stripped people of their clothes and pushed them into the freezing dark. Everyone learned quickly that naked skin in that cold meant death. Humanity did try to fight back in a way. There were plans and theories about using bombs, machines, space stations, anything. But it didn't matter. You can't shoot a black hole. You can't negotiate with something that doesn't care. Then, when it became clear there would be no miracle, People did what people always do when they're terrified and starving. They divided up. Tribes formed. Forts formed. Rules formed. We stopped calling each other citizens and started calling each other threats or allies, depending on who had food, heat, and weapons. The old world had been full of differences and arguments. The new world took those differences and sharpened them into knives. My group settled near a wide river, surrounded by trees. I couldn't tell you the exact place anymore, because maps stop being useful when you can't see landmarks and you don't have satellites, and the world is mostly the same color, black. We were Americans once, or at least we lived in what used to be the United States. Now we call ourselves Prometheans, named after the figure from old stories who stole fire for people. The name fits. Fire is everything now. We trade wood. We trade tools. We trade anything that helps someone stay warm one more night. We built a fortress out of wood, tall and thick, with walls you don't fully understand until you leave and turn around and see how it rises against the dark. When the torchlight hits it, it looks almost like a castle, the kind from fairy tales. We call it Prometheus. It isn't pretty up close. It's rough boards, sharpened stakes, patched gates, and constant repairs. But it holds. Guards watch the walls. Woodworkers go out in layers and masks and cut trees from the surrounding forest. Scavengers travel light and far, looking for what the old world left behind. Canned food, fuel, blankets, batteries, books, medicine if you're lucky. And some of us stay behind to keep the fires fed, to care for the sick, to cook for the hungry, and to teach the children who will never know what sunlight felt like on there. Faces. I'm the chronicler. That's what they call me. It means I write down what was and what is, because memory doesn't last forever, and the dark makes it easy to forget there was ever anything else. I work by candlelight. I fill journals until my hand cramps and my fingers lock. Then I place what I've written in the settlement library for anyone who wants to read it. I write true history when I can, pulled from old books, old movies, and the scraps of stories people still remember. I also write fiction, because people need stories almost as much as they need bread. In my time as a scribe, I've copied down and retold the works of writers from before the blackout. Some of it is imperfect, because I'm doing it from memory or damaged pages, but I try to keep it faithful. I don't know my exact age anymore. Time got strange after the sun disappeared. Without days, without seasons, you count life by sleeping and waking and surviving. But my hair has gone gray, and my face has lines that weren't there when I was young. Most days are simple. Wake up, eat at the communal kitchen, go to my study, write until my hand starts to betray me. But the last few weeks have been different. The kind of different that makes you feel like the world is still changing, even after the biggest change already happened. It started with a raid. 3 loud bangs echoed from across the river, and then 3 bright flares burned up into the sky. The younger kids stopped in their tracks and stared like they were watching a miracle. Most of them had never seen anything so bright. They didn't understand what it meant. The older ones did. Below the flare light, guards saw armed men and women running toward our walls. Some carried guns, most carried bows. The alarm bell rang, first time in years. Hearing it was like hearing a voice from an old nightmare. Everyone had a role. Fighters rushed to the walls. Others moved children and elderly to locked shelters. I was pushed into one of those shelters with the people judged too weak to fight. I didn't like it. I still had strength in me, and pride is hard to kill, even after the sun dies. But the council had spoken, and in Prometheus, the council's word kept the fort from tearing itself apart. Behind locked doors, we heard shouting. We heard metal hitting wood. We heard screams. Then came gunfire, loud and sharp, a sound so sudden and violent that some of the children covered their ears and cried. The battle went on for hours. 4 hours, I was told later, though it felt like a lifetime while we sat in the dark, holding our breath and waiting to find out if we would still belong to Prometheus by morning. Finally, there was a knock from outside. 5 sharp knocks. The signal that the fighting had ended and the gates were still ours. I opened the door and saw Henry, one of the guards. His face was cut badly, a scar stretching from his top lip up toward his temple. The wound had messed with his mouth so much that his speech came out thick and slurred, but he was awake and steady on his feet. Battle's over. We won. 17 of us are dead. We stepped out into the courtyard and saw the damage. Somehow, the raiders had managed to break the front gate enough to get bodies through. Torchlight in the central fire lit the scene in flickers and shadows. Blood on boards, broken arrows, spilled supplies. Dead men and women on both sides, twisted in ways the human body isn't meant to twist. The council gathered what prisoners they could. There was no room for mercy. Not after the blood. One by one, the prisoners were stripped of their layers and sent out beyond the walls, shoved into the cold dark with nothing. Their teeth chattered. Their bodies shook. Some begged. Some cursed. Some went quiet and walked like sleepwalkers until the darkness swallowed them. In the old world, we might have taken them in. We might have fed them and locked them up and tried to pretend we were still civilized. But the old world is gone. Now it's simple. If you spill blood, you risk being bled. As I watched them disappear, I looked up at the sky. The black hole sat where the sun used to be, a red ring around nothing. It made me wonder how long we had before it swallowed us too. What would it feel like? Would we even notice? Would we care by then, after so much loss? We assumed those prisoners would die out there. Naked, frozen, gone. We were wrong. A few days later, I was sitting near the main fire, taking a short break from writing. I had a mug of hot coffee in my hands, one of the few luxuries I was allowed because of my job. The truth is, my home is one of the smallest places in Prometheus. The council never made me rich. They just made sure I stayed useful. I sipped and thought about what I should write next. Sometimes I retell pieces of the old world. Things like early space travel, the moon landing, the way people used to dream about stars. But I hesitate. How do you explain the moon to children who have never seen it? To them, it sounds like a made-up story, no different from dragons or wizards. So my mind drifted to another book I remembered from before the blackout, a sad story about old legends and forgotten memories. It had stayed with me for years, even when I couldn't remember the details. I decided then that I would try to retell it carefully, in plain words, for a world that needed something gentle to hold on to. I stood to return to my study. That's when someone grabbed my arm. Reginald, a guard so tall he always seemed to be looking down at trouble, stood there with a face that told me not to waste time. "What is this about?" I asked. "Reggie," he said, like he didn't have the patience for formal names. "I need your help." "With what?" "We need you to write down something. Things our people have been seeing outside the gates the last few days." His voice was tight, like he had to force the words out. I followed him to the barracks. Torches burned along the walls, throwing orange light over faces that looked drained of life. A group had gathered, guards, woodworkers, scavengers. They sat or stood like people waiting for a sentence to be passed. Their eyes were empty in a way I didn't like. It wasn't just fear. It was the look people get when they've seen something that doesn't fit inside the world they understand. Reginald cleared his throat and motioned to me. "The chronicler will see you now." He set up a table and 2 chairs facing each other, then handed me clean pages and fresh pencils. Even that small kindness felt strange. It was like preparing a witness stand. The first to speak was a woman named Hannah, one of the woodworkers. She looked to be in her 30s. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun. Her knee bounced hard enough that the table shook a little. I told her to start when she was ready. "I'm Hannah," she said, "and I've seen things I can't explain. You're safe here," I told her. "Just tell me what happened." She swallowed and forced herself forward. "We were out cutting trees," she said. "I was holding the lantern while we checked an oak. It was big, and when I knocked on it, it sounded hollow. Good for cutting, good for burning. I told Alec to start with the axe, and we'd use the big saw after. Then I heard something behind me, something running through the woods. Fast. I turned, lantern up, and I saw something move behind a tree far away. The lantern light doesn't go far. It was just a shape at first. She stopped and looked at Reginald. "Can I have some water?" He brought it, and she drank like someone coming up from underwater. At first I saw eyes. She continued. Reflective, like an animal. But when I moved closer, I realized it wasn't an animal. It was a man. He was crouched low, like he was hurt, shaking, and he was naked. "Naked?" I repeated, because sometimes writing a word down makes it feel too real. "Yes. No clothes. Nothing. And he was breathing, moving like the cold didn't touch him." "What did you do?" I called out. I asked if he was okay. I thought raiders had stripped him and left him out there, because that's what people do now. But the more I looked, the more I knew something was wrong. I moved closer with the lantern. Alec came with me, axe ready. When we got close enough to see him clearly, he looked wrong. His skin was white, but we're all pale now, aren't we? That part didn't scare me. It was the rest. His fingers were black, his toes too. And she hesitated, her face twisting his private parts. Black like they were burned. I thought frostbite, but it wasn't like frostbite. He looked at us, and then I saw his face. His eyes were black, except for a reddish-yellow circle in the center of each one. His lips were gone. His teeth were showing, bent and cracked and yellow. He didn't have a nose, not really. Just holes. I tried to speak to him again, but he pulled back like a child being scolded, and then he ran. Not like a normal person. More like an animal. "And I swear," she said, her voice breaking, I swear it was laughing. I thanked her and let her go. She didn't ask for comfort or attention. She just wanted to leave the room and find her family. To be surrounded by people who were real and warm and human. The next person was Zachary, one of our scavengers. He was small, thin, quick, the type that could slip through broken windows and back out before you heard glass crunch. His black hair looked greasy and stuck to his forehead. He didn't meet my eyes. I knocked lightly on the table to get his attention. He jumped. "Sorry," he said, forcing a laugh. "I'm jumpy." "Tell me what you saw," I said. He rubbed his hands together like he was trying to warm them, even in the torchlit room. "I go alone most of the time," he said. "I like it that way. I was out for days. I came across what looked like a huge store, a market. Did it have a name?" I held my flashlight up, he said. The sign looked like Walmart. I laughed once, by accident, the way older people laugh when something from the past shows up in the present like a ghost. Everyone stared at me like I was the strange one. I explained quickly that it had been a famous chain store, back when people traded paper money for everything they wanted. Zachary nodded like he didn't really care, and continued. I went in with my crossbow ready, flashlight strapped to it. I wasn't afraid. I've seen things, bad things, People out there do anything to stay alive. I've seen cannibals. I've seen families dead on the roadside. I know what the world is now. But I never saw anything like this. He swallowed hard. I found canned food, big cans. Candy, too. Clothes on the floor. I thought I could use some for kindling. And I found books. He reached into his pack and pulled out several worn paperbacks, their pages yellow but still intact. My heart actually lifted, just for a second. Titles from the old world. A big novel about the end of civilization. A Bible. A collection of horror stories. An ancient epic. They smelled like dust and time. I thanked him, and for a moment he smiled like someone proud to bring treasure home. Then his face fell again. I heard whispering, he said, far away at first. But I knew it was a voice. It was like someone whispering too loud, like they wanted to be heard but didn't want to be seen. I loaded a bolt. I turned my flashlight off so it wouldn't give me away. I kept a hand on the shelves to guide myself. I moved toward it until the whisper got so loud I could understand the words. I leaned forward over the table. What did it say? His eyes shined, wet with fear. It kept saying, "Do they know they'll be dead?" Over and over. When I turned the flashlight on, it was a woman, or what I thought was a woman, holding a baby. Naked. Her lips were gone, like Hannah said. And the baby looked like it too. White and shriveled. Black fingers. Black feet. What did you do? I ran, he said. I didn't shoot. I just ran. He looked at me like a child expecting punishment. Does that make me a coward? Is that what you'll write? I told him no. I told him running didn't make him a coward. It made him alive. And in a world like ours, survival instincts were sometimes the only honest thing left. I asked Reginald for a short break to my notes and write everything down clearly while it was fresh. I sat alone and tried to describe what Hannah and Zachary had described. The words felt stupid on the page, like I was writing about monsters from a cheap horror movie. Yet the fear in their faces had been real. They weren't trying to impress anyone. They weren't chasing attention. In a world like ours, lying for fun didn't make sense. I didn't know what to call these things. Ghouls, maybe. Dead things that walked. But the details didn't fit any story I'd ever read cleanly. When I returned, the next witness was a guard named Nick Lois. He was stout and broad, beard wild, hair messy. Unlike the others, he sat down like he owned the chair. He looked at me with a kind of forced confidence, the sort men wear when they can't afford to look scared. Is this going to take long? He asked. I've got a post. Reginald told him the others would cover him, and he could talk as long as he needed. Nick leaned forward, elbows on the table, and started without waiting. You remember that raid, he said. The flares. 2 days after that, I was on the wall at night. The other guards were inside eating. I stayed outside. I wasn't hungry. He glanced away like he could still see what happened. I stood near a torch. I looked up at the black hole, that red ring. Hard to imagine the sky ever being blue, isn't it? He laughed once, but it wasn't a real laugh. There were bodies from the raid still on the ground outside, too many to move quickly. I was rubbing my eyes, tired, and then they were gone. All of them. Every corpse. And at the edge of the torchlight, one of those things was standing there, naked, white skin, black fingers and feet, black everything. Nick's confidence cracked a little as he spoke. He started biting his nails without noticing. It stepped into the light. Its head was bald, skin cracked and dry. The eyes, those eyes. He took a breath and forced on. I shouted. I aimed my bow. I didn't want to waste a rifle bullet on something that didn't have armor. I warned it, loud, hoping someone inside would hear. Then I fired. Nick's mouth worked like he tasted something bitter. "I'm the best shot in Prometheus," he said. "So when I tell you I hit it, I hit it. First arrow should have dropped it." It kept walking. I fired again at its chest. It kept walking. As it got closer, I saw my arrows in the ground behind where it had been. Like I missed. But I didn't miss. The arrows were in it. They were sticking out. One through its eye. One in its chest. Others in its back. Blood on the shafts. It didn't slow down. It didn't care. I shot again, close. The arrow went through it like it was, like it didn't matter. Nick's voice dropped. It looked up at me, and it spoke, calm as anything. "What did it say?" I asked. "Will you be ready?" Nick said. That's what it said. Then it ran back into the dark, and I could hear it laughing. When he finished, he stood up and shook my hand hard. Then he turned to Reginald. "Can I go home?" he asked quietly. "I want to be with my wife." Reginald let him go. I sat there and tried to make sense of it. 3 people, 3 separate accounts, same description. Same missing lips, same black eyes with a red ring, same laughter, same cold calmness, same way of speaking in short, strange phrases. Maybe it was hunger. Maybe it was illness. Maybe it was something in the air that made people see things. But then why were the details the same? More people gave testimony that day, from different tasks and different distances from the gates. The stories blurred together in my notes, but the patterns stayed. These things appeared near the edge of light, never fully stepping into safety, always watching. They whispered phrases like, "They don't know yet," "Not ready," "No, not ready." They seemed scared. When we finally ended the interviews, Reginald pulled me aside. "What do you think?" he asked. "You're old. You remember the world before. Did anything like this ever happen?" "No," I told him. "Nothing like this. Not in any history I've ever read." He stared at me like my answer offended him. "So, you don't know?" he demanded. "You think I'm the first person to face something new?" I snapped back, tired and angry. "Go to the library, read about Chernobyl, read about the plague, read about the atomic bomb. People have always faced things they didn't understand. We're not special. We're just trapped." I left before I said something that would get me in trouble and went back to my study. I wrote for hours, trying to arrange the testimonies in order, trying to make it read like a real account instead of a campfire story. Eventually, my hand cramped so badly I could barely hold the pencil. That night, I dreamed of those eyes. Black, with a red ring inside. When I leaned closer in the dream, the red ring shifted and became familiar, like something I had been staring at in the sky for years. In their eyes was the black hole. A knock woke me. I pulled on layers and opened the door. Henry stood there. His scar had healed, but his speech was still thick. "Reggie wants you," he said. "We found something." I followed him through Prometheus. It was impossible to tell time. No dawn, no dusk, just wake and sleep. The settlement was moving in quiet routines, but there were fewer people out than usual, like everyone felt something coming and didn't want to admit it. We stopped at a building used for tools and weapons. 2 guards stood outside. Reginald was there, and Emma, another council member. Their faces were hard. "Glad you're here," Reginald said. "We need you." Emma leaned in, voice low. "What you see and hear stays with us. Only the guard and council. Do you understand?" I looked at them and saw fear hiding under their authority. "I understand," I said. The guards opened the door and we went inside. The first thing I heard was the sound of something heavy being hit. A wet, ugly thump, over and over. A large guard named George stood shirtless. sweating, breathing hard. He had been beating someone tied to a chair. When Reginald told him to take a break, George stepped away, wiped his face with a rag, and pulled his clothes back on. Then I saw what was in the chair. Hands black as coal, feet black as coal, naked skin pale as wax, a bag over its head. Reginald nodded to one of the guards. "Remove it." The bag came off, and the face underneath made my stomach turn. No lips, teeth exposed, teeth clicking, skin stretched tight, holes where a nose should be. Eyes black as ink with a red ring glowing in the center, like a tiny version of the sky's wound. Reginald turned to me. "Write down everything." He stepped forward with a knife and pressed the tip into the thing's forehead. Blood ran down its face. It didn't blink. It didn't flinch. "Are you ready to talk?" Reginald asked. "What are you? How many of you are there?" The creature's eyes moved slowly around the room like it was curious. Then it saw me writing. Its gaze locked onto me, and for a second, I forgot how to breathe. Reginald slapped it hard. "This isn't about him," Reginald said. "It's about you and me." The creature shifted its face toward Reginald, but its eyes kept sliding back to me, like it couldn't help itself. "What are you?" Reginald repeated. "I was human once," the thing said. Reginald's voice sharpened. "What do you mean?" "Look at my body," the thing replied. "My throat. There was a scar on its neck, deep and old, like a cut that should have killed it. Yet the skin was healed over." Reginald's mouth tightened. "You're undead, then? Some kind of reanimated corpse?" "Death does not take your kind anymore," the creature said. "Your bodies belong to him." "Him who?" The creature lifted its chin, pointing upward as if it could see through the ceiling into the sky. "You call him a black hole," it said, "but he is more than that." Reginald gave a bitter laugh. "Sure." He drove the knife into the creature's thigh. Black blood burst out and splattered the floor. The creature didn't cry out. It didn't tense. It kept speaking like it was discussing weather. "He is everywhere," it said. "When a sun dies, it spreads us to planets like yours." Reginald leaned close, furious. "How many of you are there?" The creature tilted its head slightly, almost amused. "How many died on this planet when the sun went out?" It asked softly. "They will inherit the living world before he decides to take it for himself." Then it turned its gaze back to me. "Are you getting every word, scribe?" My pencil stopped. My hand went numb. Somehow, despite the fire and torches, I felt cold, like the first day of darkness all over again. The creature's mouth moved, lipless, making the words sound too clean for something so ruined. "Prepare them," it said. "Prepare them for the new world. Prepare the way for the void." Reginald snapped. He slashed its throat. Black liquid poured out over its chest. Finally, the creature looked at him directly. Blood filled its throat, making the voice wet and broken. "The others will come for me," it gurgled. "You cannot win." Reginald hacked again and again until the head came free. The eyes still looked alive, still shining with that red ring. Reginald dug them out and stomped them until they burst into dark paste. Emma stood frozen, pale. "What are we going to tell them?" she asked. "We're not saying a damn thing," Reginald said. "You want to leave them in the dark?" Emma's voice shook. "If they hear this, they deserve to know." "And do you want them to live the rest of their lives waiting for the end?" Reginald shot back. "Sitting in fear, useless?" Emma's jaw clenched. "I don't like this, Reggie. It's the right call, like hell it is. We'll vote on it tonight," Reginald said. "Council will hear both sides." Emma looked at me then, and in her eyes I saw the question she didn't want to ask out loud. "What about the chronicler?" She pointed at me anyway. "What about him?" Reginald's answer was simple. He burns everything he wrote here. Nothing leaves this room. I protested. I told him secrets were how the old world died, leaders hiding truths until it was too late. But Reginald didn't care. He wiped his knife, then grabbed the pages I had written and tore them in front of me. The scraps fell into the creature's black blood, soaking up the ink and turning into dark mush. I sat there, sick, watching history repeat itself in a smaller room with a smaller council. Afterward, I went to the mess hall and asked for a meal I didn't deserve. Canned rice and chicken and one of the cook's brownies that he saved for special occasions. He asked what the occasion was. I couldn't tell him. I just said I needed something sweet. I ate and drank coffee and tried to pretend the warmth in my stomach could push away the cold truth in my head. That night I went to bed hoping the council would choose honesty, hoping they would warn everyone, hoping we might have a chance to prepare. Then the alarm bell rang again. Gunfire cracked through the air. Explosions boomed, loud enough to shake the floor. People ran through Prometheus like a flood of shadows. I opened my door and felt the panic in the air like smoke. Guards fired flares into the sky to light the battlefield. Prometheus almost never used explosives. That was for emergencies. And this was one. I ran to my study, grabbed unfinished journals, loose papers, anything I could carry. I didn't know why I did it. Maybe because I was a chronicler and that's what I knew. When everything falls apart, you try to save the words. I made for the shelter where the non-fighters hid during raids. I reached the door and found it locked. I knocked 5 times, the signal. Nothing. I knocked again and called out my name. From inside, a child's voice shouted, "Go away, chronicler." "Please," I said. "This is an emergency." "I'm sorry," the child yelled back, voice tight with fear. "We're full." I stood there with the sounds of battle behind me, screams, shots, the heavy thud of something hitting wood, and understood in one clear moment that I had been left outside. Not out of cruelty, maybe, out of fear and numbers and simple survival math. I slid my papers under the door. "Please," I said quietly, "save my work. That's all I ask." Then I walked away. When death finally comes close, you either panic or you go calm. I didn't want to die pounding on a door like a beggar. I wanted to face the end in a place that made sense. I went to the library. Inside, the fireplace still burned. The shelves stood tall and steady, filled with the last pieces of the old world, copied and saved and protected from the dark. I listened to the battle outside and tried to make it fade into the background. I chose a book that felt right. The Hobbit. My mother had read it to me when I was small. It had been the first real story I ever loved. If I was going to die, I wanted the last thing I held to be something that remembered a world with sunlight and songs. I read it by firelight while Prometheus fought for its life outside. When I finished, I felt strangely calm, like I had completed a circle. Still, I had one more thing to do. I had one more set of words left in me. So I opened my last journal and began to write. Because even if my pages burned, the act of writing felt like standing up straight. This is my final record. I don't know if anyone will read it. I don't know if there will be a Prometheus tomorrow. But I know this, the things in the dark are real. They look like us, but ruined. They speak like people, but empty. They don't feel pain the way we do, and they don't fear cold. I finally have a name for them. Because names matter, even at the end. They aren't just raiders. They aren't just wild animals. They aren't just sickness. They are the black hole suns. They wait in the darkness beyond our firelight. They move through the frozen world like it belongs to them. And if what the captured one said was true, then they are only the first wave. They will eat what's left of civilization, and then their God in the sky will eat whatever stars remain. If anyone finds this, if anyone lives long enough to read it, Don't waste your last hours pretending you have forever. Hold the people you love close. Keep your fires burning. Keep your weapons ready. And when you look into the dark, remember, it's looking back. Story 2. I used to be the kind of pale that looks unhealthy, like I belonged under fluorescent lights instead of the sun. People at work joked that I was moon-tan pale. It got under my skin more than I wanted to admit, so I started forcing myself outside after my shifts. I told myself I needed fresh air. I told myself I needed a hobby that didn't involve screens or noise. That's how landscape painting happened. I wasn't good at it at first. I wasn't even sure I liked it. But the quiet helped. When you're staring at water and trees and clouds, the stuff that embarrasses you at work doesn't seem so big. At least, that's what I hoped. Some days, the shame still followed me out there. It came in flashes I didn't invite. Like the day a couple of younger guys on the factory floor waved me over like I was some slow animal. They weren't yelling, but they didn't have to. They stood with their hands in their pockets, talking to each other while I stopped what I was doing and walked the whole length of the production line toward them. It wasn't even what they said that burned. It was the way they said it. The way they didn't stop their conversation when I arrived. The way I felt myself shrinking while I waited for a gap so I could answer. They outranked me now. A few years ago, they wouldn't have. Life changes quietly until one day you notice you're the old one being called across the floor. I tried not to bring that feeling into my weekends. I tried to paint it out of my hands. That was why I went scouting through wetlands and back roads, looking for places that were untouched and wide and hard to reach. I wanted scenery that felt like it belonged to the world before factories. One Saturday, I stopped at a feed and tackle shop outside town. It was the sort of place where the floor was always a little damp, and the air smelled like bait, old wood, and fried grease. In the back, they served biscuits with country gravy, and they sold watery beer in cardboard cubes like it was a regular grocery item. I asked the men at the counter if they knew any good spots to paint. I tried to sound casual, like I wasn't desperate for an escape. That simple question turned into an argument, good-natured at first, then louder, like they were competing over who knew the best hidden place. They tossed around names of creeks, ridges, and old logging roads. Most of it meant nothing to me. But then, one older man, with fingers stained from tobacco and fish blood, mentioned a basin where clean mountain water spilled down into marshland. He said the water up there was so clear it looked fake, and the air was cold even in summer. Another guy, younger and rough-looking, laughed and said if I wanted a view, I should go to the pond above the waterfall. He said it was deep in a way that didn't make sense, and still in a way that felt wrong. He called it shockingly deep, like he had measured it himself with fear. He added something else that made the others go quiet. There's a chapel up there, he said. Wapato Chapel. Looks down over the pond. A few of them exchanged looks, the kind people share when they're deciding how much to tell a stranger. Then the man with the stained fingers leaned in and said, almost kindly, that some religious group was buying up the surrounding land. He didn't call them a church. He called them zealots, like he'd tasted the word before and didn't like it. Before I could ask what that meant, one of them asked me a question that didn't match the conversation at all. You bringing Wapato? He said. I must have looked blank, because he sighed and explained. Wapato was a vegetable, a tuber that grew in the brackish wetlands around here. Starchy, plain-looking, like a potato that had lived through something. The old man likes it, he told me. I asked, what old man? The others acted like that was obvious. They talked over each other, telling a story that sounded half local legend and half warning. They said there was something in that pond. A sturgeon. Huge. Old beyond sense. They said it had been successful in life, which was a strange way to talk about a fish, and that it had gotten trapped in the clear water because it was too fat to fit back through some underwater passage that connected the pond to the swamp below. It was the kind of tale that should have made me laugh, but no one was laughing. They spoke like they were telling me about a dangerous bend in the road. "Bring him Wapato," the older man said, like it was a normal rule. "If you go up there, bring it." I didn't even know where to buy Wapato. Then I saw a bundle of it, tied with twine, sitting in a crate near the register like it was something tourists picked up the way they bought postcards. I bought it mostly because it made it easier to end the conversation. It gave me a reason to nod, pay, and leave. The bundle was cold and damp in my hands as I carried it to my car. I followed the roads they described, gravel turning into rougher gravel, then into something that barely qualified as maintained. The land shifted as I climbed. Forest thickened and the air changed. The higher I went, the more the smell of swamp fell away, and a cleaner, colder smell came in, wet stone, pine, moving water. I found the waterfall first, because you can hear it before you see it. The sound was steady and heavy, not like a playful stream, but like a constant pouring, as if something was emptying itself without stopping. When I stepped through the trees and saw it, I understood why they argued about it. The water came down bright and clean, catching the light in silver and gold, and it spilled into a low, foul-looking marsh that spread out like a dark stain. The swamp below swallowed the foothills. Willows stood with their roots in mud. Somewhere out there, hidden among the trees, I saw the shapes of houseboats and cabins perched on stilts, half lost in green. It felt like two different worlds jammed together, mountain water and swamp rot. I drove higher, following the topography the way the men had said, until the road crested a hill that looked like it had been cut open. The clearing on top was an odd shape, not a simple circle or square. It looked trapezoidal, like someone had drawn it with a ruler and then gotten bored. Douglas firs stood tall around the edges, dense and dark. The clearing itself was raw and uneven, logged a few years back by my guess. There were stumps, scattered debris piles, and young trees planted without much pattern. The ground was rough enough that I could imagine someone breaking an ankle if they weren't watching. But the view was wide. On one side of the hilltop, the land dropped down toward an expanse of muddy willows leading seaward, a wet, flat world that went on and on. On the other side, the horizon was made of forested hills, darker green against the sky. And straight ahead, down a gentle incline, I saw the pond. It wasn't a bright lake with waves and sparkle. It was an intense blue that looked almost painted already. Still, so still that it seemed to swallow sound. At the far end of the road, half hidden by trees, stood a small white chapel. Even at a distance, it looked too white, like it had been scrubbed and repainted more times than any building should be. The Wapato Chapel, I assumed. It sat overlooking the pond like it had been placed there to watch. I parked where a couple of backpackers were standing by their cars, comparing maps and talking about posted warnings for bears. Their voices sounded too normal for the place. I nodded at them and shouldered my gear: easel, paints, canvas, water, food, and the bundle of Wapato, heavier than it should have been. As I walked downhill, the air got cooler. My boots sank slightly in places where the ground held moisture. I picked my way around debris and uneven ruts. The paths through the clear cut didn't make much sense. They wandered and doubled back, as if whoever made them didn't care where they led. It would be easy to drift off one path and end up slipping under a pile of broken branches and half-rotted trunks. I chose a spot by the water where the shoreline was firm and the view was clean. The pond reflected a cotton white sky, overcast and flat, and yet the reflection was so perfect it looked like a second world under glass. Across the widest part of the pond, the forest line cut through the image like a wall of permanent twilight. I checked the time and felt relieved. I had plenty of daylight. I unpacked slowly, letting the routine calm me. Easel first. Canvas. Brushes laid out in order like tools. I poured water and mixed a few basic colors. My hands stopped shaking the way they sometimes did after a long work week. Out here, I could pretend my life was simple. It was while I was doing this, while my mind was settling into painting, that I looked up again at the chapel. The double doors were open. They weren't white anymore from this distance. They were black, standing wide like a mouth. I was sure they'd been shut when I arrived. I remembered the building as a clean, sealed shape on the hill, distant and quiet. It hit me then that it was Saturday. In town, people had said the congregation were Sabbath keepers. They didn't worship on Sunday like everyone else. They worshiped on Saturday, and they did it at the water. I'd heard bits and pieces, that they dressed in white, that they closed their eyes and spoke in tongues, that their hymns sounded less like songs and more like funeral chants. Baptisms, but not the usual kind. Singular baptisms, one man had called them, like each one was its own strange event. A lone fisherman stood further down the bank from me. He'd been there quietly for a while, and I'd liked that. It made the place feel less isolated without being crowded. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. Then, church bells rang. Not distant, not soft. They cut through the air and seemed to vibrate in my ribs. The fisherman stiffened like he'd been shocked. He reeled in his line immediately, fast and practiced, as if he'd done it before. He gathered his things and started toward the road. I thought he was just leaving because the sound ruined the quiet. But when he passed behind me, he slowed and stopped, like he had something he couldn't leave unsaid. He asked, in a low voice, if I had wapato. The question landed in my stomach like a stone. I nodded, unable to figure out why I was nodding. He looked past me to the water. I followed his gaze, and we stood there for a moment in silence, watching the pond's surface like it might blink. The water was so still, it didn't look real. Then, right in front of us, the surface tension swelled as if something large was pushing up from underneath without breaking through yet. The pond bulged. A line formed. And then it split. A back surfaced, armored, ridged, and brutal, like overlapping plates of dull metal. The shape moved slowly, deliberately, with the steady patience of an old machine turning on for the first time in years. The fisherman whispered without looking at me. He knows, he said. It's his Sabbath. My mouth went dry. I didn't ask who he meant, because I already knew. The fisherman kept whispering like he was afraid the water could hear him. Biggest sturgeon anybody's ever seen, he said. 300 years old, at least. I turned to answer him, to ask how anyone could know that, to say something human and normal. No one was there. He was gone, not walking away, not moving up the bank. Just gone, as if he'd never been beside me at all. I scanned the road and the clearing, expecting to see him hurrying up the hill. I didn't. The only movement I saw was on the hilltop near the chapel. People were coming out. They were dressed in white, as bright as the chapel itself. They poured from the open doors and moved down the clear-cut incline in pairs and threes. They didn't follow the wandering paths at all. They came straight toward the pond, stepping over broken wood and uneven ground without hesitation, as if the debris wasn't there, as if the landscape had been arranged for them. Each person carried a small bundle. For a moment, I thought they were carrying food for some kind of picnic or ceremony. Then I wondered if they were carrying clothes for baptisms. I couldn't tell. They reached the far side of the pond from where I stood, and arranged themselves along the water's edge. They didn't spread out randomly like tourists. They took positions as if they'd practiced, leaving gaps and clusters that looked intentional. Then they stopped moving. They stood still and faced the water. And then, slowly, I realized some of them were facing me too. White hoods hid their faces. They didn't speak. They didn't wave me away. They simply regarded me like I was an unexpected object in the wrong place. My heart thudded so loudly I was sure they could hear it. I stood there with my hands half raised, brush in one and palette in the other, suddenly aware of how ridiculous I must look. I thought about packing up and leaving. I thought about how far my car was, uphill, across unstable ground. I thought about being watched while I tried to act casual. Then I remembered the bundle of Wapato sitting with my supplies. My mind grabbed onto it like it was a rule I could follow. A simple thing to do that might make the situation less dangerous. I walked to the water's edge. The mud sucked at my boots. The air smelled faintly of rot under the clean scent of the pond. I took the Wapato bundle in both hands, and it was damp and soil-stained like something pulled from a grave. I placed it into the pond. It floated, bobbing lightly, drifting outward toward deeper water. Without knowing why, and because I felt like eyes were on me from across the pond, I made a slow sign of the cross, deliberate enough that it couldn't be mistaken. I wasn't even sure what I believed. It was more like a gesture of peace, a way to say I wasn't here to interfere. The white-robed figures didn't react. They didn't acknowledge me. They continued whatever worship they were engaged in, silent from this distance, but rigid, with focus. I walked back to my easel, my hands shaking worse now. I tried to tell myself this was all just strange people doing strange things, and that I was safe as long as I stayed on my side and minded my business. I picked up my brush. I looked at the scene again, wondering whether to include them in my painting. A landscape painter usually avoids putting people in, because people change the story. People make the image about society instead of nature. But they were part of the view now. White figures along dark water. A white chapel behind them. A blue pond that looked too deep. While I hesitated, the Wapato bundle reached a point where the water looked almost black. The surface erupted. Something snatched the bundle down with a hard splash, quick and final, and the pond swallowed it. All that remained was a widening circle of ripples spreading out like a signal. And inside me, something lifted. It wasn't relief. It wasn't fear. It was a sudden, bright elation that didn't match what was happening. It felt like a rush of happiness that came from nowhere, like someone had poured warm light into my chest. My brush touched the canvas. And the painting began to happen without me. That's the only way I can explain it. I didn't struggle with proportions. I didn't second-guess color. The forms resolved with a precision I didn't have. The pond laid itself down in perfect gradients. The forest line became a clean cut of darkness. The waterfall spill, the logged clearing, the distant chapel, the white figures along the far shore, everything arranged itself into a composition so right it made my throat tighten. It was as if the scene wanted to be painted, and I was only the tool. The clouds shifted. A break opened in the overcast sky, and sunlight came through in a sudden beam. Gold hit the pond. The blue turned into something alive. The waterfall flashed like metal. Across the water, the congregation moved like they'd been waiting for that light. They became active all at once, feverish, coordinated. I saw them immersing youths at the edge, dunking them fully, pulling them out, hands raised. Even from this distance, I could tell their mouths were moving fast. The sound didn't carry clearly, but I imagined it. Tongues, chanting, hymns that dragged like dirges. The great sturgeon breached once. Not like a dolphin, not playful. It rose in a slow arch, heavy and ancient, armored back, cutting the water like a relic being lifted out for display. Then it sank again, leaving the pond smooth behind it, as if the surface healed. Tears ran down my face, and I didn't wipe them. My hands worked steadily. I finished the portrait as if I'd rehearsed it for years. When it was done, I stood back and stared at it. It was the best thing I'd ever made. It was the only thing I'd ever made that felt true. Something in me snapped loose. I left my easel and walked toward the far side of the pond, reckless, forgetting the unstable ground and the distance. By the time I was close enough to be heard, my voice came out too eager, too grateful. I told them I loved what they were doing. I offered my contact information. I offered a donation, fumbling for words that sounded respectful. I promised I would come back the following Saturday. I don't remember anyone replying. I don't remember their faces. I remember white fabric and stillness and the feeling that I'd stepped into a room where my presence didn't matter. Then I was running. I packed my gear like a man escaping a fire. I hauled everything up the hill too fast, my lungs burning, my boots slipping on loose dirt. I reached my car and threw it all in, barely caring if I crushed my brushes. I drove home at a speed that should have gotten me pulled over, my hands tight on the wheel, my mind floating between triumph and panic. I couldn't wait to show my wife. I burst into the house with the painting like it was proof that my life was about to change. I talked too fast. I told her about the pond, the light, the way the scene had come together. I said it felt like I'd finally found what I was supposed to do. She didn't share my excitement. Her face was tight with worry, not pride. She looked at me like she was watching someone she loved step toward a ledge. She asked why I smelled like that. I hadn't noticed until then, but it was true. The scent of damp swamp clung to me, sour beneath everything else. And for the first time since leaving the pond, the whole day hit me as strange. Too strange. The fishermen disappearing. The congregation appearing like they'd been poured from the chapel. The feeling inside my chest that hadn't belonged to me. Still, I wanted the painting to speak for itself. I set it up where she could see it properly. The best light in the room. I covered it with a cloth like it was something important. I stood behind it, smiling too hard, waiting for her to finally understand why I was trembling with joy. I pulled the cloth away. I watched her expression change, but not into awe. Confusion came first. Then, something like disgust, like she'd realized she was looking at something sick. I turned toward the canvas, already forming excuses. Maybe it looked different in this light. Maybe it needed to dry. Maybe. The image was gone. In its place were smeared, degenerated streaks. Thick paint had cracked and buckled as if it had rotted overnight. Colors bled into each other in ugly, swollen patches. It looked less like a landscape and more like an infection under glass. Like the canvas itself had been bruised. It didn't resemble the pond or the chapel anymore. It resembled some enormous grief, a cosmic weeping, color trying and failing to become form. And then, within that chaos, one shape resolved clearly enough to make my stomach drop. A razor-like forehead, armored plates. The face of an ancient sturgeon emerging from the mess as if it had been waiting there the whole time. Its eyes were there too. They didn't look painted. They looked present. My wife and I stared. Neither of us spoke. The room felt colder, like the air was being pulled away from us. We were still standing there, still staring at those eyes, when headlights swept across the front windows. A van pulled into our driveway. Old, battered, the kind churches use when they don't have money but still have purpose. The engine cut off. Doors opened and closed with heavy final sounds. Strange-looking parishioners stepped out. They weren't wearing hoods now. They walked straight up to the house. not hesitating, not looking around like visitors, not acting like they needed permission. They didn't knock. They tried the door. Story 3. It started about a week ago, right after I moved into my first place alone. I'd done my time in the absolute zoo that was on campus housing, and I was beyond ready to be done with it. My freshman year roommate was, honestly, a walking lesson in what happens when someone has no idea what personal space or basic hygiene means. I tried to be patient. I tried to be normal about it. But there's only so much a person can take before they start fantasizing about violence. One night I came back to the dorm and found a pair of boxers laid out on the edge of my bed like they belonged there. They didn't belong to me. I just stood there staring at them, trying to understand how any human being could think that was acceptable. That was the kind of year it had been. 1,000 small violations, each one gross enough to matter, but small enough that you felt crazy complaining about it. By the time finals ended, I wasn't just eager to leave. I needed to. I wanted a door that locked behind me. I wanted a space that was mine. I wanted to stop feeling like I was living inside someone else's mess. I got lucky and found a studio apartment that I could actually afford. It was in an older building not far from campus. Nothing fancy, ground floor unit, small kitchenette, a stacked washer and dryer, and a storage closet barely big enough to be useful. But after dorm life, it felt like a penthouse. No roommate, no shared bathroom, no mystery smells that weren't mine, just quiet. I rented a U-Haul, hauled everything in, and spent the next few days unpacking and setting up. The place had that old building feel, slightly uneven floors, a few scuffs on the walls, the kind of quiet creaks you notice only when you're alone. Still, I was happy. I was tired, but it was the good kind of tired, the kind you earn. That was when I noticed the stain. I had just finished putting away my kitchen stuff when I saw a small dark spot on the floor. It was partly hidden under the corner of my rug. If the light hit it wrong, you could almost miss it, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. It wasn't like spilled coffee. It was blacker than that, smudgy, like someone had dragged a muddy boot across the wood and left behind a thick residue that soaked in instead of drying. It looked greasy in a way that made my skin itch. My first instinct was to clean it. I grabbed a washcloth and tried wiping it up. Nothing. Then I tried a stronger cleaner. Still nothing. It didn't smear, didn't lift. If anything, it looked like the wood had been permanently stained, like the floor had absorbed something it couldn't let go of. I stood there for a while, annoyed and tired and already out of patience for surprises. I'd just moved in. I didn't want my first problem to be something gross. In the end, I did what people do when they don't have energy left. I covered it. Out of sight, out of mind. I pulled the rug farther out so it hid the spot completely, then went back to unpacking and tried to forget it existed. Once I broke down the last cardboard box and threw it out, I finally let myself fall into bed. The mattress was soft, in a way my dorm bed had never been. It felt like my whole body sank into it. Even though it was mid-afternoon, I couldn't resist. I told myself I'd close my eyes for a few minutes. I fell asleep almost instantly. I've never been someone who cared about dreams. People who keep dream journals always seemed a little too intense to me, like they wanted their brain's random noise to mean something. I never saw the point. Dreams were just your mind sorting things out, dumping leftovers, playing clips. Nothing magical. Nothing important. I liked letting them fade away as soon as I woke up. That evening, when I woke up drenched in sweat and gasping like I'd been underwater, I realized something had changed. Even now, trying to piece together this past week, I can remember that first dream in perfect detail. It didn't fade like normal. It stayed in my head like a memory, sharp and complete, with sounds and smells and even taste. In the dream, I was lying on a grassy hill. The horizon stretched out in every direction, rolling fields under a wide blue sky. There were no buildings, no roads, no power lines, just open space. A light breeze moved across my face, and the air smelled like spring, fresh in that clean, bright way, like flowers had just opened and the world had been washed overnight. I breathed deeply and felt calm. But the place didn't feel empty, exactly. It felt unfinished, like a stage that hadn't had props added yet. The landscape was there, the sky was there, but it had the strange feeling of being a draft instead of a real place. Like someone had sketched it and hadn't decided what to put in it. Then, something shifted beneath me. It started as a gentle movement, like the soil was settling. Then, it became a slow heaving, like the ground was breathing. I tried to push up on my elbows, confused, and realized the earth was giving way. I began to sink. At first, it was slow enough that my brain tried to explain it. Maybe it was mud. Maybe it was quicksand. But it wasn't wet like mud at the surface. It was normal grass, normal soil, until it wasn't. The earth swallowed me. Soil slid over my sides, then over my chest. I felt it pile on top of me as if it had weight and intention. The sky above shrank to a small square of blue, framed by dirt and rock shifting around me. The air changed, growing thick and wet. I tasted something rotten, like decay had a flavor. I couldn't breathe properly. I couldn't move. And then something coiled around my leg. That was the moment I woke up. I bolted upright in bed, tangled in sheets that were damp with sweat. My heart was pounding hard enough to make my vision pulse. My stomach rolled, and nausea crawled up my throat so fast I barely made it to the bathroom. I knelt over the toilet, gripping the bowl, trying not to throw up. For a while, all I could do was breathe in short, painful bursts and wait for the world to stop spinning. Eventually, the pounding in my head eased. The nausea faded enough for me to stand. I turned on the sink and ran cold water, splashing my face and neck. My first thought was that I was getting sick. A fever can do weird things, and that dream had felt too intense to be normal. I found my thermometer, checked, and stared at the number. Normal. So I told myself it was stress. Moving is exhausting even when it goes well. New place, new routines, new worries. Maybe my brain was just catching up. I checked my phone and realized I'd only slept about an hour. It was early evening. I needed food, something solid and normal, something that didn't taste like rot and soil. I hadn't bought groceries yet, so I threw on a jacket and decided to go out. As I laced my shoes, my eyes drifted to the rug. I knew the stain was under there. And I felt this sudden, overwhelming need to get away from it. It didn't feel like mild dislike or I should clean that. It felt like instinct. Like the part of my brain that doesn't use words was screaming to put distance between my body and that one specific spot on my floor. It was all I could think about. Even sitting in a booth waiting for a burger, I kept feeling it. Cold, sharp, primal. A sense that something was wrong at home, and the longer I stayed away from it, the safer I was. At the time, I blamed the dream. I blamed exhaustion. I told myself I was being dramatic because I'd had a nightmare in a new apartment, and my brain was being weird. Now, I know better. That first night, I slept badly. I couldn't relax. Every creak of the old building got under my skin. The sheets felt tight. My muscles ached no matter how I lay. I kept waking up and checking the time, then forcing myself to shut my eyes again. The next day, I moved through my classes like a zombie. I was technically present, but my mind wasn't. I did the minimum in every conversation, and counted down the hours until I could go home and crash. When I finally opened my apartment door that evening, the smell hit me so hard I actually froze. My place stank like something had rotted in it. Not a light smell, not old building smell. It was sour and thick and wrong, like roadkill mixed with spoiled fish and mold. It filled my nose and throat. I tasted it. My first thought was that something had died in the walls. Old buildings have mice, sometimes. But it seemed too intense for that, and too fast. I'd been gone all day. An animal doesn't usually go from fine to that in a few hours. Then, I remembered the stain. I pulled my shirt collar up over my nose and walked to the rug. My stomach tightened as I knelt and lifted the corner. The black spot was still there, but it looked deeper, darker in the center. And around the edges, I could make out faint lines like veins or roots spreading outward. It wasn't dramatic enough that I could call it moving, but it looked less like a mark and more like something growing into the wood. The smell was strongest right above it. I had to clench my jaw to keep from gagging. I called my landlord. They sounded annoyed, like I was calling to complain about a squeaky hinge. They told me they'd have to contact the maintenance contractor. I asked how long, and got the answer that made my chest drop. 3 business days. And the contractor didn't work Mondays or Tuesdays. It was going to be almost a full week. I stood there with my phone in my hand, staring at the spot on the floor like it could hear me, like it enjoyed the delay. I didn't want to stay there. I didn't want to breathe that air. I didn't even want my stuff in that room. I shoved my phone in my pocket, packed a bag, and went to a cafe to do homework. If I had to wait a week for someone else to fix it, then fine. But I wasn't going to sit in the apartment, marinating in that smell, any longer than necessary. When I came back that evening, I opened all the windows and turned the ack up high. If it was mold, airflow would help. At the very least, it might weaken the smell enough for me to sleep. That night, the sound of crickets drifted in through the open windows, steady and normal. Between that and pure exhaustion, I finally fell asleep. I dreamed of the fields again. This time, the horizon wasn't empty. Trees stood far away in scattered clusters. But they didn't look right. They had no leaves. Their branches were twisted and bare, reaching up and out like fingers. There was no wind that I could feel, but the trees swayed anyway, as if something invisible was pulling at them. The ground under me felt warm and damp. I looked down and saw the grass had changed. It wasn't bright green anymore. It was yellow, sick-looking, and coated in dark slime that clung to the blades. The air was humid and thick. When I breathed, I tasted something sweet underneath the rot, like fruit that had been left out too long, turning into something toxic. My skin felt hot and wet, like I had a fever so bad my body didn't know what temperature it was supposed to be. And then, like before, the ground began to pull me down. The earth swallowed my legs, my hips, my torso. It wasn't just gravity. It felt like hands. Thick, slimy coils wrapped around me, tugging me deeper. Bugs crawled over my skin. Maggots. I felt them writhing, biting, burrowing, and I couldn't shake them off. Dirt pressed in from every side, crushing and tight. I tried to breathe and pulled in mouthfuls of foul muck. It filled my mouth, my throat. I was choking. Just as I was sure I would suffocate, something changed in the dark. Eyes opened. All around me, pale white eyes snapped open in the soil, countless and silent, like stars appearing in a night sky where they didn't belong. They watched me from every direction, unblinking. The darkness wasn't empty. It was crowded. I woke up screaming and sucking in air like I'd surfaced from deep water. The windows were open. The ack was blasting cold air. None of it mattered. The room was still full of that rotten smell, thick enough to taste. I grabbed my phone and stared at the time. 3:15 a.m. After that, things blended together into a routine that didn't feel like living. I'd wake up exhausted, drag myself to class, force myself through conversations, then come back to my apartment and try to pretend it was still my home. Every night brought another restless sleep and another dream of that landscape becoming worse. By Thursday, I was so tired I felt unreal, like my body was moving, but my mind was lagging behind. That evening, I walked through a park near campus, mostly because I didn't know what else to do with myself. The park was full of normal life: couples holding hands, dogs chasing balls, kids climbing on playground equipment. The sky was painted in warm sunset colors. It reminded me of when I was younger. My mom used to pack a cooler with sandwiches and cheap frozen treats, and she'd take my brothers and me to parks like that on Saturdays. We didn't have much, but she always tried. I found myself thinking about how those small moments felt bigger now than they did then. Back then, I didn't know what it meant to feel safe. I just had it. I must have been distracted because I didn't see the tree roots sticking up out of the ground. My foot caught, and I went down hard onto my hands and knees. I cursed loud enough that a few parents looked over, irritated. My cheeks burned with embarrassment. I started to stand, brushing dirt off my palms, when something near the root caught my eye. A small mound of dirt, slightly raised, like something was buried right under the surface. At first, I thought it was part of the tree root system. Then it shifted. It pulsed, just a little, like muscle under skin. Before my brain could process what I was seeing, the dirt split open. A single cloudy eye opened and looked directly at me. It was milky, dead-looking, filmed over like it belonged on a corpse. But it was there, inside the ground, staring up. I screamed and fell backward, kicking at the spot like I could stomp the sight away. My heart hammered. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. For a few seconds, I couldn't do anything but scramble away on my hands. When I finally forced myself to look again, there was only dirt. No eye, no split, no sign that anything had happened. But people were staring at me now. All the normal park sounds had shifted. Conversations paused. A few kids stopped playing. Adults watched with expressions that ranged from confusion to concern to suspicion, like they were trying to decide if I was dangerous or just unstable. I couldn't stand it. I got up and left as fast as I could without running. As I walked back toward my building, the sun went down and the streets cooled. I pulled my jacket tighter, but I wasn't shivering from the temperature. I kept thinking about that eye, about how it matched the dream too perfectly, about how the ground had looked alive for a second. I tried to tell myself it was sleep deprivation, that my brain was mixing dream images into real life, that I was stressed and tired, and my senses were playing tricks on me. I wanted one full night of sleep, just one night where I closed my eyes and nothing happened. I was so caught in my head that I almost didn't notice the sound, a sharp metallic clanging echoing down the street. It came from a narrow alley ahead, lit only by a single lamppost that threw a weak yellow light over cracked pavement and peeling paint. The buildings looked older there, more worn. The shadows in the alley looked too long. Another clang. Something about it pulled my attention the way a siren does. Against my better judgment, I walked closer. I stopped at the alley entrance and peeked around the corner. A man was there, kneeling on the pavement. Middle-aged, from what I could tell. He wore a thick jacket, jeans, work boots, and a beanie pulled down low. His back was to me, and his posture looked reverent. Like prayer, like devotion. He lifted a long steel pipe over his head with both hands. Then he slammed it down onto the pavement with violent force. The clang was loud enough to hurt. Metal against concrete screamed through the alley. He did it again, and again, Each swing was steady, almost mechanical, like he wasn't angry, just committed, like he was doing a job. My instinct was to back away. I didn't want him to notice me. I didn't want to be anywhere near someone who behaved like that in an alley at night. I started retreating, slow and quiet. Just before he moved out of my view, a new sound joined the metal. A dull crack. He'd broken a piece of the pavement loose. He dropped the pipe and threw himself down onto the ground with sudden energy. He pressed his ear against the small hole he'd made, like he was listening to something on the other side. And then I heard him murmuring. It sounded like a conversation. He spoke softly, fast, and every so often he paused as if waiting for an answer. I couldn't make out words from where I stood, but the tone made my skin crawl. It didn't sound like someone talking to themselves. It sounded like someone responding. I backed away faster, careful not to make noise, and only when I reached the end of the block did I turn and walk quickly toward home. I felt relief when my apartment door clicked shut behind me. It lasted about half a second. The smell was waiting inside like it had been saving itself for my return. It filled my nose instantly. Without thinking, I opened the windows and cranked the act again, desperate for air movement, desperate to thin it out. I remember thinking, in a tired, bitter way, that I was almost starting to miss my old roommate. At least he was normal gross. At least you could point to the problem and say, that's it. That's what's making me miserable. Eventually, the smell faded a little, enough that I could function. I ate a quick dinner, just a Hot Pocket and some popcorn, whatever I had left, and went through the motions of getting ready for bed. Shower, brush teeth, collapse. That night, I didn't dream of the hill. I dreamed of being buried. Darkness pressed in on me from all sides, heavy like wet concrete. The taste in my mouth was foul and sour. I could feel earth shifting around me, worms and insects crawling across my skin. I tried to scream but couldn't get enough air. Panic surged through me, and with it a burst of strength. I forced my body to move, just a little, enough to scrape myself against rock and dirt. Pain flared, sharp and immediate. My skin tore. I felt warm blood smear along my limbs. I kept struggling, small movements, desperate. Then, in the distance, a tiny pinprick of yellow light appeared. I froze, staring at it. The light slowly grew, swelling bigger, brighter. And as it did, something inside me relaxed. The fear eased, the pain faded, the crushing weight lessened. It wasn't logical, but it was real inside the dream. The light felt safe. It felt like comfort. The earth around me seemed to fall away, and suddenly I wasn't trapped anymore. I felt like I was floating. I moved toward the glow, half crawling, half swimming through nothing. Warmth spread through my body as I got closer. The yellow light cradled me. It felt like being held, like being wrapped up in something gentle, something that wanted me to rest. My senses softened, my thoughts blurred. The warmth seemed to melt me down into quiet. And then my alarm went off. I woke up startled, shivering in cool air from the open windows. My alarm was blaring from my nightstand. That was when I realized I wasn't in bed. My blood went cold as I looked around. I was on the floor, curled in the fetal position, wrapped around the stain. For a second, I couldn't make my brain accept it. My body felt wrong. My skin crawled like insects were under it. I scrambled to my feet and backed against the wall, staring at the rug like it might lift itself. I don't sleepwalk. I've never sleepwalked. I don't have a history of waking up in weird places. But there I was, on the floor, hugging the exact spot I'd been trying not to think about. Something snapped inside me then. Not a dramatic movie moment, just a quiet internal decision. I was done. I started packing immediately. Forget class, forget waiting for maintenance. I didn't care what it cost. I would get a hotel and stay there until someone fixed the apartment, and if the landlord wanted to argue about it, fine. I'd rather fight over a lease than keep sleeping next to whatever that was. I pulled on my shoes, grabbed my backpack, and went to toss it onto my bed so I could pack my laptop. In my rush, I stepped too close to the center of the stain. The floor gave way under my foot with a sick crack. My leg dropped through rotten wood. Pain shot up instantly as splintered boards jabbed into my shin. My jeans kept the splinters from slicing deep, but the impact hurt badly enough that my eyes filled with tears. I grabbed the bedpost with both hands, trying to yank my leg free. It wouldn't come. Something held me. It felt like stepping into thick mud, except there was no mud on the surface. With every pull, my foot sank deeper, like the floor beneath was softening around it. Then the smell rose up from the hole, and I learned what worse actually meant. It was beyond rotten. It was like rotting meat, sewage, infection, like pus and decay and something chemical all mixed together. It filled my throat and made me gag. I started dry heaving, eyes watering, barely able to breathe. I forced myself to inhale as much as I could stand, planted my other foot for leverage, tightened my grip on the bedpost, and pulled with everything in me. With a thick, wet pop, my leg came free. I fell backward and nearly hit the wall, shaking. My shoe didn't come with me. I looked down and saw something that made my mind go blank. Beneath the floorboards was not empty space. It wasn't pipes or wiring or crawl space. It was a churning mass of mud and dirt and eyes and teeth. Eyes dead and cloudy, packed into the moving sludge. Teeth chattering nonstop, clicking together like insects. My shoe vanished into it as if it had been swallowed. And from the pit came a sound, not words exactly, but a chorus of frantic gibberish that made my vision blur and my head spin, like listening to something your brain wasn't built to understand. Thick black tendrils rose up, slow and lazy, like they were waking, tar like ropes feeling out the edges of the broken floor. Then they started reaching for me. I screamed. I didn't think. I grabbed my bags and ran. I slammed through my apartment door, sprinted down the hallway, hit the lobby, shoved through the front entrance, and didn't stop until my lungs burned and my legs shook. I ran like I was being chased because I knew, in my bones, I was. When I finally stopped far enough away that I couldn't see the building clearly, I vomited onto the curb. After that, I sat on a bench, shaking, staring at nothing. Looking back, I don't think I processed it. My brain had hit a limit and shut down. I felt numb, like my mind had stepped away from my body for its own protection. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I called an Uber. I must have looked awful, because the driver barely spoke to me. They just drove. I watched the city slide past the windows in warped shapes and lights, like everything was slightly unreal. I kept expecting to smell that rot again, like it had soaked into me and would follow me anywhere. We passed the park. People were still there, living normal lives. Dog walkers, joggers, kids on the playground. A group on the grass caught my attention, and I leaned forward to see them better as we stopped at a red light. They were lying in a circle on woven blankets, heads facing inward. Their bodies were curled tightly in the fetal position, and each of them had one ear pressed to the ground. The light changed. The car moved. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if any of them lifted their heads. I checked into a hotel and locked the door behind me like that would keep the world out. My sleep has been slightly better here in the sense that at least I'm not waking up next to the stain. But I still dream. The dreams are less vivid now, like someone turned the brightness down, but the place is the same. The fields are dead and rotting. The sky has turned a sickly yellow. Those twisted leafless trees have multiplied, their branches waving like they're underwater, grasping at something I can't see. And beneath the soil, the sea of mud and eyes and teeth keeps moving, endless and patient. Even during the day, I can't shake the feeling that something is down there. Like the ground beneath every sidewalk and lawn has an awareness. Like a shark beneath water, circling, waiting for the right moment to pull you down. Sometimes I catch myself standing still on the street and feeling my stomach tighten because the concrete suddenly seems too thin. I still haven't heard anything useful from my landlord or the maintenance crew. At this point, it doesn't matter. I'm not going back. They can threaten me, they can sue me, they can send letters, they can keep my deposit. I don't care. Any punishment they can give me is nothing compared to what was waiting under that floor. When I sat down in the hotel room to write all of this out, I turned on the TV for background noise. I always write better when there's sound in the room, and I needed something to fill the silence. I needed something that wasn't my own thoughts. A local news story came on that made my hands go cold on the keyboard. A teacher had requested a welfare check on a family. The parents weren't answering calls. The kids hadn't been seen. A week had gone by without contact. So the teacher did what they were supposed to do and asked authorities to check on them. When police arrived, they found all 4 family members dead in the backyard. The reporter said they appeared partially submerged in the dirt, partially buried, curled in the fetal position. Cause of death, starvation, and exposure. I stared at the screen, trying to breathe normally, trying to tell myself it was coincidence. But my body didn't believe in coincidence anymore. After the segment ended, I searched online for more details. I found a couple articles that quoted first responders. One of them described it like the family had started sinking into the earth, like the ground had opened to take them, like the dirt had accepted them the way water accepts something heavy. I closed my laptop and sat there for a long time listening to the hotel act hum. There is something under us. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's been there forever or if it's new. I don't know if the stain in my apartment was the start of it or just one place where it broke through. But every night, when I dream of that field that used to be green and bright and open, now collapsing back into decay, I feel it just below the surface. I feel it reaching out with that slow hunger, patient and certain. It doesn't feel like an animal. It feels older than that. Like it's calling things back to it the way gravity calls everything down. And the worst part is this. I don't think it's only calling me. Like that black rot spreading under my rug, I think it's spreading everywhere. And from what I've seen, the man in the alley listening to the pavement, the people in the park with their ears pressed to the earth, I think some people can hear it. I think some people are starting to listen. Story 4. It's been years since the Blue Children came to our town, and even now people still talk about it in half voices, like saying too much might bring something back. Nobody ever figured out where they came from. Nobody learned what they really were, or why they chose Richenside of all places, a small, quiet city that usually only made the news for school funding arguments and the occasional storm. There were only 2 of them, a boy and a girl. Neither looked older than 10. They didn't arrive with sirens or helicopters overhead. No one saw them get dropped off. No one saw a car on the security cameras. The story everyone agrees on is simple. They somehow walked into one of the gated neighborhoods late at night and knocked on the first door they could find. That door belonged to Gail. The neighborhood was the kind of place with stone entry signs and trimmed hedges and neighbors who smiled in daylight but watched each other carefully through blinds at night. Gail lived there alone. She was well known in town, steady, polite, involved. She served on the local school board and went to church on holidays and sent thank you notes when people did her favors. Her husband Robert had died years earlier, but she still wore the same sapphire ring he'd given her decades ago. People in Richenside spoke about Gail the way they spoke about landmarks. She was just there, part of the town's shape. The children reached her house at 10:52 p.m., according to the timestamp on the doorbell camera. That exact time ended up getting repeated so often, it became like part of the legend, as if 10:52 wasn't a moment, but a doorway. Gail opened the door expecting maybe a neighbor with some emergency, or a delivery mistake, or a teen pulling a prank. Instead, she found two children standing on her porch with their hands behind their backs. They stood perfectly still, their faces tilted up, staring at her as if they already knew how tall she would be when she opened the door. That detail stuck with Gail later. She said it wasn't just that they were looking up, it was the way they looked up, confident and sure, like they'd measured her before they arrived. The boy was dressed too neatly for a random lost kid. He wore a navy shirt with a sky-colored floral pattern, like something meant for a wedding or a formal family photo. Over it, he had a white vest and collar, black pants, black shoes. His hair was combed back to the start of his neck, clean and careful. The girl wore a short navy dress that looked expensive in the porch light, with pearls around her neck that glimmered when she shifted her chin. She had black stockings and matching shoes. Her hair was parted and braided into two long braids that hung all the way down to her waist. Their eyes were what Gail noticed first. They were the exact kind of blue you see in jewelry displays. Deep, bright, unnatural. She later said their eyes reminded her of the sapphire in her ring, the one Robert had slid onto her finger so long ago. There was something about the shine of those eyes that made her think of polished stone, not a living thing. But the feature no one could stop talking about, the thing that made the story sound impossible, was their skin. It wasn't pale with a hint of blue, like someone cold. It wasn't tinted by porch lighting. It was fully blue, not cartoon blue, not makeup blue. It was a shade you only imagine when you look at deep space photos, that distant, heavy blue that feels like it belongs far away from anything human. A color that doesn't feel like it should exist on warm skin. Gail just stared. She didn't scream. She didn't slam the door. She didn't call the police right away, even though later she admitted she didn't understand why. She said it was like her brain forgot how to act like a person. Speech left her, along with every normal reaction she'd relied on her whole life. Then the boy took one small step forward and spoke. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was rough and dry, like he hadn't had water in weeks. "We've been walking for days and we haven't eaten. Could you please let us in?" Gail blinked twice, slow, like she was forcing her body to restart. She tried to fit the scene into something that made sense. Lost kids, a sick prank, a movie being filmed, anything. "You kids really all alone?" she asked. "You from round town?" They didn't answer. Gail leaned out and looked left and right, craning her neck to scan her yard and the street beyond. The neighborhood was quiet. The streetlights shone on clean sidewalks and parked cars. Nobody stood behind the bushes. Nobody waited at the curb. There wasn't even the feeling of someone nearby. It was just the two of them on her porch, perfectly placed in the center of her welcome mat like they'd been arranged there. "Ma'am," the girl whispered. Her throat sounded as dry as the boy's, and the crackle in it made Gail wince in a way she couldn't explain. "We're both very hungry and very tired. May you please let us in?" Gail's mouth opened, but no words came out. She glanced down and noticed a box of chocolates she'd set near the door earlier that evening. It had a bright red bow and a tiny card attached, thanking the gardeners who took care of her yard. She'd planned to give it to them the next morning. Without taking her eyes off the children, she carefully opened the box. Her fingers felt clumsy. She picked out a single chocolate, one of the caramel-filled ones, and held it out. She didn't step onto the porch. She didn't lean too far. Her arm extended like she was feeding something dangerous at the edge of a cage, ready to yank it back if either child lunged. The boy took it gently, almost politely, with small, bony fingers. He split it in half with a slow, careful motion, then dropped one piece into the girl's open palm. For a moment, the porch was silent. Then they ate. They didn't nibble. They didn't chew like children who've been told to mind their manners. They devoured the pieces with their mouths open, biting and tearing like starving animals at a trash bag. Chocolate smeared across their lips and stained their teeth within seconds. The sounds were wet and frantic, and Gail felt her stomach twist as she watched, half expecting them to start foaming at the mouth, or choking, or doing something even worse. But they didn't. When they finished, the boy calmly pulled a handkerchief from his breast pocket, dabbed his mouth clean, then handed it to the girl. She wiped her mouth too, delicate and careful, then gave it back. The boy folded it and tucked it away again as if nothing strange had happened. Gail swallowed hard. The quiet returned, but it didn't feel normal anymore. It felt like the air itself was listening. "Where do y'all come from?" she asked again, and this time she couldn't hide how uneasy she felt. The boy's face tightened slightly. He didn't move his feet. He tilted his head just enough to glance at the girl, his hands locking together behind his back. The girl met his eyes and gave an almost invisible nod. Then the boy looked back at Gail, and his eyes widened. The dark inside those blue irises seemed deeper than it should have been, like a hole. "The great deep," he said. His voice became steadier as he talked, almost rehearsed, like he was reciting something sacred. "When the sun falls, we crawl out from the sand, with the burrowing crabs and the plastic cups. We dance under the black sky while the waves soak our toes. The stars burn against our skin. We stretch and stretch to reach the top, the shady hills where the seagulls meet." As he spoke, Gail felt a strange lightness in her head, like she might faint. Her eyes watered. A pressure tickled behind her temples. The words didn't make sense, but they also felt like they were meant to make sense, like if she just listened harder, they would unlock something in her mind. The girl never looked away from Gail, not once. She watched her as if she were checking that every sentence landed. The boy continued, and his voice softened into something almost dreamy. "We glide down from the skies and play in the clouds. Time loses, meaning the farther you go. The lost balloons and planes are our only friends there. It's easy to get lost when you forget what you're looking for." When he finished, both children narrowed their eyes at the same time, like two people sharing a single thought. Gail took a step backward. That faint, dizzy feeling grew heavier. Her cheeks went cold. Sweat broke out across her palms so fast it startled her. Her heart beat hard enough she could hear it in her ears. "I don't understand," she said, and she blinked rapidly, trying to keep her eyes open, trying to fight off the sudden pull of sleep that seemed to hit her all at once. Her knees buckled. She dropped to the floor inside her doorway, landing hard on her hip. The world tilted. She craned her neck up and saw the children looking down at her. They were holding hands now. The boy spoke again, quiet and certain. "You will." What happened next was hard for Gail to explain later, because it didn't feel like a normal illness, and it didn't feel like a normal sleep. She was out for 3 full days. But it wasn't the clean, blank kind of unconsciousness. She would jolt awake sometimes, drenched in sweat, fever burning through her like she'd been left under a heat lamp. Her throat would be dry. Her skin would itch and prickle. The room around her would be blurry, like her eyes were coated in film. She could only make out pieces, the dimness of her bedroom, the line of light under the door, and quick movements beyond it. Shadows that crossed the crack in the doorway and vanished again. Every time she tried to sit up for too long and stare into the darkness, the girl would appear at the door. Not rushing, not panicking, just stepping into view with a finger pressed to her lips. Shh. Her blue skin blended into the low light in a way that was almost calming, which made the whole thing worse. Gail later said the girl looked like a safe picture you'd hang on a wall, even while her presence made Gail's blood feel wrong in her veins. Then, on the third day, Gail woke up and realized the fever was gone. The heat that had been pulsing through her body had vanished as if someone had switched it off. She sat up too fast, expecting dizziness, but it didn't come. The sheets were damp and cold. Her hair clung to her head from dried sweat. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood. The house smelled strange, not like sickness, not like sweat, something worse, something old. She grabbed the sweatshirt she'd been wearing and lifted it to her nose. The smell hit her so hard she pulled it away instantly, gagging. It was a rotten, grave-like odor, like fabric that had been draped over a corpse and then handed back to her as a gift. Before she could even process that, she heard soft movement in the hallway. The children approached her bedroom without making any sound from their shoes. They didn't shuffle. They didn't creak the floorboards. They simply appeared at the doorway and then moved inside as if the house belonged to them and she was the guest. Gail started to speak, panic rising fast. "I didn't say nothing, how'd ye?" "Shut up. We have much to tell you," the boy snapped. His tone was nothing like the pleading child from the porch. The politeness was gone. The softness was gone. Even the tiredness was gone. He stood with his hands behind his back again, the girl mirroring him, and now they looked less like children and more like something wearing children's bodies correctly enough to fool a stranger at a distance. Gail sat back down on the bed. She didn't argue. Part of her was scared, but part of her felt pulled in, like she had no choice but to listen. It wasn't just fear. It was a kind of attention, like the part of her brain that should have been screaming had been replaced by a quiet fascination. "We would like more chocolates, like the one you gave us in your offering," the boy said. "Bring us more of the chocolates promptly." "The caramel ones," the girl added, her face brightening slightly at the thought. "Just like the one you gave us." "That's what I said," the boy muttered. "I wasn't sure she fully understood." "She understands." They spoke like adults, bickering over small details. Gail's skin prickled. The boy paused and pressed 2 fingers to his temple, as if listening to something Gail couldn't hear. Gail stared at him with the same slack, fixed look she'd had on the first night before she collapsed. It felt like her eyes didn't fully belong to her. Then, the boy lowered his hand and pointed 1 finger at her. "You'll keep our presence silent so we can all remain content together. You will also get us water, as we are still very thirsty and haven't drank in many days. Let that be the first thing you do." When he pointed, Gail saw something under his nail. Tiny pale grains. Sand. "There's plenty of water, you know," Gail said, and her voice sounded weak even to her. "Filters on the fridge. Taps from the sink. Drink it from the tub, for Christ's sake." The boy's face shifted, tightening with anger. In an instant, he moved forward and grabbed the front of Gail's sweatshirt, yanking her toward him. He shouldn't have been able to do that. He was small, thin. His arm looked like a bundle of sticks. But he pulled her whole body weight with an effortless jerk, as if she were a pillow. Gail's breath left her. The boy's blue skin flushed with streaks of red, and his expression twisted into something sharp and ugly. "No. No, no, no," he shouted, suddenly full of wild energy. "Your water is poison. It is not what we want. It will dry us out from the inside and kill us dead. 2 shriveling skeletons walking until we drop. The water will drip from our lips and flood the house. We'll gasp for air until the water turns to blood. His voice rose, and Gale felt the room tightening around her, like his words were filling the air with pressure. Then, the girl touched his shoulder, just a small twist of her fingers, gentle and calm. The boy stopped mid-rant and turned away from Gale, as if someone had clicked a switch inside him. The girl stepped forward and sat at the end of the mattress, smiling faintly, like she was about to ask for something harmless. "You will get us water from the sea," she said, "with salt from the deepest trenches and brine from the floors where the fish drop. You'll get it before the sun falls today. You'll do it because we asked you so kindly." Gale should have slammed the door on them. She should have run to a neighbor. She should have called the police, the school board, anyone. Instead, later that day, she walked down the beach path with a bucket in her hand. The sun was low and bright, and the heat on her back felt like punches. She couldn't understand how tired she was. She'd supposedly slept for 3 days, but her body moved like she'd been awake the entire time, carrying a weight she couldn't name. She went slowly down the sandy hills, focusing on small sensations to keep herself steady. She paid attention to how the grains of sand pressed into her feet, how they shifted and gave way and massaged the nerves in her toes. That detail became everything, as if noticing it could keep her from thinking about why she was there. At the bottom of the path, she did something strange, something she would never have done in her normal life. She let herself fall into the sand on purpose. She tumbled down and lay there, letting the grains creep over her skin and into the sweatshirt she still wore, the sweatshirt that smelled like death. She rolled into deeper, wetter sand where the moisture cooled her body. She exhaled like someone finally getting relief. Then, she pushed both hands down into the wet sand and started searching. It wasn't logical. It was instinct, like she was looking for something she'd lost long ago, buried under the surface where kids ran and adults walked without thinking. After a minute of digging, her fingers closed around something that wriggled hard in her palm. A mole crab. It twisted and rotated its legs, antennae flicking back and forth, frantic outside its burrow. Gale stared at it like she was hypnotized. There was a rhythm to it, almost beautiful. For a strange moment, she wanted to copy it, to make her body move that way. But she didn't know how to even begin. Then, she remembered the urgency in the children's voices. She flung the crab back into the sand where it vanished quickly, burrowing away as if the beach swallowed it. Gale stood and went to the waterline and began filling the bucket. Over and over, she dipped it into the ocean until it was heavy. As she worked, a faint sense of connection crawled through her mind. She thought, in a distant way, about the things the boy had said. Touching clouds, lost balloons, planes, a place where time didn't mean anything. There was a version of her, she thought, that might have chased a balloon into the sky without caring who watched. A version of her that might have reached for something impossible and not stopped. She dipped her thumb into the bucket and tasted the seawater. The salt hit her tongue like a slap. She gagged, coughing, spitting it out, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand as if she could erase the sensation. Still, she carried the bucket home. The children were waiting. They didn't thank her. They didn't act impressed. They simply rushed to the bucket the moment it crossed the threshold and slurped at it like starving animals. Their tongues flicked in and out fast, almost like anteaters, and Gale stared, sickened and fascinated at the same time. The chocolates went the same way. When she brought caramel ones, they ate them with frantic devotion, swallowing too quickly, leaving no crumbs and no wrappers unattended. They didn't seem to get sick from it. If anything, they seemed stronger afterward. This became her routine. Every few days, she went to the sweet shop in the mall and bought the same type of chocolates. Then she walked to the beach and filled a bucket with ocean water, making sure it tasted strong and briny, making sure it felt right, though she couldn't have explained what that meant. Then she carried it back to the house like an offering. Weeks passed like that. Around the time the first worried letter from the school board appeared in her mailbox, Gail realized something else had changed. She was starting to feel attached to them. At first it was small, a look the girl gave her that resembled approval, a nod that made Gail's chest warm, as if she'd pleased the teacher, a rare smile from the boy that smoothed the wrinkles in Gail's face as if she were younger for a second. Then it was the way they shook her hand sometimes, their skin cool against hers, their grip too firm for a child. They would do it after she found what they called sweeter water, and Gail would glow with pride as if she'd done something important. Then it became the conversations. It started with a few words late at night, a question here and there. Over time, those moments stretched into longer talks that lasted a full minute, sometimes more. Gail would sit with them and listen to the way they spoke, poetic and strange, like everything they said was part of a bigger story she could almost understand if she tried hard. Enough. One night she woke up, needing the bathroom. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. When she stepped into the bathroom, she froze. The bathtub was filled all the way to the brim. The children were inside it, fully clothed, almost completely submerged. They lay motionless in the water like dolls placed carefully in a display. Only their faces were above the surface, just high enough to breathe. Their eyes were open. Gail stood there, horrified, and for a second she couldn't tell if they were asleep, dead, or something else. "Oh dear," she whispered, "I didn't mean to." "You've awoken us early," the girl said, cutting her off immediately. There was no sleepiness in her voice, no grogginess at all. It sounded like she'd been waiting for Gail to arrive. "We still have so long to rest," the girl continued. "Tell us a story, and then you may leave. Your words will guide us back to the sea." Gail's mouth went dry. She tried to think of a bedtime story, anything from her childhood, any tales she'd heard and could repeat. But her mind was blank. She hadn't raised children. She hadn't told stories to anyone. Those memories weren't kept fresh. They had faded away, like everything else. She looked down at her hands, fingers twisting together as she searched for something to say. Her sapphire ring caught the bathroom light, a small, sharp gleam of blue that didn't belong to skin. So instead of a fairy tale, Gail told them the story that lived closest to her heart. She told them about a young woman and a young man, both aimless, both standing at the edge of adulthood with too many paths and too much time and no clear idea what they were supposed to do with it. She told them they met at a park near the city. She told them the man was so beautiful she knew she had to speak first before someone else did, because one look at his eyes made everything slow down, just like people say it does when you meet the person meant for you. As Gail spoke, her voice softened without her realizing. The girl watched her steadily, and the boys stared too, both of them sinking a little deeper into the warm water as if the words were rocking them. Gail talked about birds singing too loudly in the trees. She talked about how the man said he'd been trying to build the courage to speak to a girl who came to the park sometimes. She said he later told her that God must have turned his eyes toward him and made it so she spoke first. Her voice started to shake as she reached the part where feelings become memories and memories become loss. I think she began, and then she stopped. She looked at the children. They were still, just like before. Their eyes were open, wide, unblinking. Gail couldn't tell if they were listening or if they had slipped away into some kind of rest that didn't look human. She backed out of the bathroom quietly and shut the door. After that, she didn't question them as much. The routine continued, and Gail's life outside the house started to fall apart in slow motion. She missed meetings. She ignored calls. She stopped responding to friends. The school board's concern grew louder. Rumors started. Then, one evening, Gail returned home with the bucket in one hand and a bag of chocolates in the other, wearing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The children met her in the living room, like always, drawn by the smell of salt and sugar. They bent over the bucket and drank greedily, tongues darting, hands gripping the rim. Gail watched them and noticed something small and wrong. The boy's right shoe was untied, the lace dragging on the floor like a dead worm. The girl lifted her head, ready to nod in approval, and then she saw Gail's expression. The girl's face changed. Gail, she said, and it was one of the only times either child had ever used her name. You look disturbed. You're not yourself. What is the matter? Oh, just a little down today, Gail lied. Nothing much to talk about. We know that's not true, the boy said, stepping into the conversation like a knife sliding into a crack. Both pairs of eyes fixed on Gail at once, and the pressure of their attention broke what little control she had left. Her shoulders sagged. She lowered her head and stared at the carpet. I had to go back, she admitted, lips trembling. I'm sorry. They were worried about me at the board, so I went to tell them I was okay. They said they thought I was drinking or got caught up in something. I tried to shake them loose, but they saw through everything I came up with. Gail swallowed, forcing the rest out even though it hurt. I told them I had guests over and I was busy. Then they started yelling, saying they were going to come by and see if everything was really all right. The children didn't move. They simply stared at her as if they were looking through her skin, right into the soft parts. Gail rushed to cover the silence with hope she didn't actually feel. It'll all go fine, she said quickly. I know they'll just come over, see everything's in proper shape, and leave. I'll get you both better chocolates and more water. I don't think anything's really wrong now that I think about it. I think I panicked over nothing. I know you two would agree. The girl and boy walked toward Gail at the same time. They placed their hands on her shoulders, one hand each, cool and steady. Gail didn't look up. She felt their fingers through the fabric like pressure points. They turned their faces away from her bowed head and stared out through the blinds into the night. Then they spoke together, perfectly synchronized. Take us to the beach. Gail obeyed. That night the beach looked like a different planet. The waves smashed into the rocks with sharp, violent splashes, and every crash sent cold through Gail's veins. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it was trying to run away from her chest. The children walked calmly beside her, their shoes leaving neat prints in the sand. They stopped where the wet sand met the dry, right at that thin border where the ocean keeps reaching and pulling back, reaching and pulling back, never satisfied. The children reclined on the sand as if they belonged there, watching clouds pass across the moon. Gail sat a few feet away and dragged 3 fingers through the sand, drawing lines without meaning. She wondered, suddenly, if the mole crab she'd held days ago was still alive, still burrowed somewhere under the surface, waiting. It is time for you to see the dance, the girl said, breaking the silence. She stood up with the boy. Gail didn't ask what she meant. She couldn't. Fear packed her throat so tightly she felt like she might choke. The children stepped closer to the water and interlocked hands. At first, their movements were careful, almost shy. They shifted their feet, turned slightly, pulled away, and came back together, like they were testing the space between them. Gail watched, confused, and then, slowly, fascinated. Minutes passed. Their dance changed. Their hands tightened. Their fingers slid up each other's arms and pushed back the fabric of their fine clothes. Their bodies began to twist in ways that made Gail's stomach drop. Their legs bent the wrong direction, then bent again. Bones cracked softly, not like a break, but like a reshaping. Their limbs stretched and folded until they resembled the crab legs that moved under the sand. They dropped lower, crawling and shifting, still holding hands, their faces tilted up toward the sky like they were receiving something from the stars. Their expressions turned blissful, euphoric, as if the pain that should have been there was replaced by pleasure. Gail should have screamed. She should have run. Instead, she sat frozen, watching as if the sight had stolen her ability to decide anything. When the dance ended, the children returned to her. Gail's fear had thinned into something else, something empty and wide. Her sense of time was gone. She couldn't have said if the dance lasted 5 minutes or an hour. The boy smiled slightly, and for the first time his voice held a quiet joy. "You don't have to watch forever," he said. "Tonight you join us with a plunge under the waves. Are you ready to dance under the moonlight and rise until the stars burn out?" Gail's mind felt far away from her body. She couldn't form a real answer. She only nodded again and again until her neck ached. The boy took her hand gently and led her toward the water. The ocean moved around their ankles, cold and alive. Seashells and small stones pressed against Gail's feet. The boy kept walking until the water reached his knees. Then he stopped and placed a palm against Gail's back, guiding her down. He lowered her until her face hovered inches above the surface. Gail saw her reflection wobbling in the dark water, an older woman with wide eyes and a mouth slightly open, like she was about to speak but didn't remember how. The boy leaned close. "Goodbye," he whispered. His hand moved to the back of her head. At first, Gail didn't understand. Then, pressure pushed her skull down, and cold water swallowed her face. Her eyes went wide. Her arms flailed. Her legs kicked. She fought like an animal, scratching and grabbing, trying to force herself up. She tried to scream, but her mouth filled with water, and only bubbles burst out into the blackness. She twisted her neck, trying to bite his hand, but she couldn't reach. She caught one last glimpse of his blank expression and empty eyes above the water. And then he pushed her deeper, down. The ocean became heavy. The surface light vanished. The world turned into dark pressure and drifting sand. Somewhere in that endless dark, a face appeared. A man's face, surrounded by the image of trees and birds as if the park itself had been carried underwater. The birds fluttered silently. Leaves moved without wind. The man's eyes looked at her with the same gaze she had seen in her dreams and remembered in her bones. Gail felt her cheeks pull into a smile. She reached out, sand floating from beneath her fingernails like tiny ghosts. Her fingers stretched toward him, toward Robert, toward the moment before everything became years and grief and empty houses. They drifted together, deeper and deeper, in a sapphire sea that looked too much like her ring. At the edge of the shore, the blue children stood and watched Gail vanish. The water swallowed her completely, her shape fading into the blue-black moving body of the ocean until there was nothing left to see. The children didn't cry. They didn't speak her name again. They turned toward the waves, readying themselves to dive before the sun could rise over the hills. "We'll find another," the boy said, and he slipped under the water before the girl could answer. The girl stood for half a second longer, listening to a distant seagull cry in the dark. Then she dove too. Their splashes disappeared quickly, fading like stones skipping across the surface. One bounce, two, then nothing at all, leaving only the sound of the waves colliding with rock, as if the ocean had never taken anyone in the first place.